You know what? My parents think I'm a spy. And actually my wife does too at times.
Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks, everybody. My name is Ibrahim Bengali. I'm your host. Co-hosting with me today, we have one of our newest members of the Wharton Tech Talks team, Sophie White. Say hello.
Hi, everyone.
And we are super excited to have Robert Jacobson with us today. We're here to talk about space. Say hello, Robert.
Hello, Wharton Podcast. Tech Talks Podcast. Excuse me.
No, it's perfect. So, Robert, we internally, lovingly, and respectfully call you Space Dude. But can you tell us who you are? You started in music and business, and then somehow you're a space expert. Who are you, and how did you get here?
I have a natural proclivity for self-research, and I guess I'm a bit of I like to study on my own terms, and I think when something inspires me deeply, which back in 2004 I saw the first flight of Spaceship One to space. I was inspired to get some space chops, and I was not necessarily space literate. I was maybe a space fan or enthusiast, but I would not call myself any type of even space geek or space enthusiast. I was I was a musician working in real estate, but I'm tenacious, and I really started by meeting people, and I was able to get some good mentors. And mentors told me certain books to read and certain things to kind of study up. And I just really did a lot of self-study, and it was just persistence and asking a lot of questions and really just trying to understand everything that I could, because I felt like since I was coming from from this other place without this necessarily formal pedigree in this area, I really had to work extra hard to if I was going to make any type of meaningful impact.
Right. It's, when I think of space, I think of, NASA, astronaut, rocket scientist, like really deep science expertise. What's coming in for you?
It's I think a lot about the human element to me. I think humans build even the robots, humans build the satellites, humans still build the spacecraft. And we have there's a sort of a current infatuation been going on for many decades for society with, celebrity industry titans. And that's interesting for a minute to me. But then I usually find after you get past the Bransons and the Bezos and the Musk, you find that there are thousands of people who help support them and also have equally fascinating and compelling stories. And then people that I met along this journey had intriguing ideas, amazing insights. And I think that was something that I've always had fondness for. And one of the things I think I'm particularly good at is bridging relationships across necessarily different industry sectors or people that maybe who would have never have connected. I mean, I think my secret skill, or what makes my superhero trait, would be this ability to kind of really help people build bridges who maybe would have never have connected, because I have a really deep and diverse network, and I don't really even know why or how that happened, but that's definitely just a natural proclivity that I have.
You're just a naturally gregarious guy who brings people together. I love that. But I mean, look, the first question that comes to me when it comes to space, and my sister posed this to me yesterday when I told her that I was talking to you, is why? Like, why are we investing billions of dollars into space? What is the vision? What's the benefit? Like, why are we doing this?
Your sister was probably referring to, when she says, why are we spending? She's probably talking about taxpayer, government spending in space, which is like just about 1% out of the 100% the government spends money on things. It's very little amount of money. I mean, NASA's budget's I think 2019 was around $19.5 billion a year. It generates so many benefits for our society in the near term and long term. I had alluded to earlier today when I was speaking to a live audience that there was, when we spend money on space, it creates real jobs here on Earth. It's inspirational. We get so many solutions across so many different domain and sectors from space. Your sister can look up space spinoffs, which are some of the spinoffs that come out of NASA. There's over 2,000. it is humanity's ultimate business plan. Why do we need to be investing this now and even more heavily? This is going to be the industry that is going to propel humanity over generations, hundreds, if not thousands of years. Yeah, we'll have the internet, blockchain, solar, pick your industry. But space is literally an area that could be the infinite business plan for humanity. Take anything we do here, just about almost anything, and then transfer it to space. Maybe it's not happening yet just today in space, but it could happen within our lifetime.
We talk about these benefits that are going to happen over. What are they? Can you give me a vision of like what that could be?
What it could be like would be having resources from space. Well, first of all, there's the invisible resources that we're using right now, the data collection from space. So we have spacecraft in space. Basically, they're robotic spacecraft, satellites that have telescopes on them, and they are providing new types of images of the Earth. We have communication satellites that are providing internet access, radio, TV. We now have, and this is new, private weather satellites that are providing new types of weather data that are currently the other government satellites are operating in a different way. And this is interesting that I didn't know this before I wrote the book. My book, Space is Open for Business, but the US government used to give away weather data almost as a soft form of diplomacy. And they now, in our weather satellites, the civilian ones, not the military operated ones, DoD has their own weather satellites, is operated by NOAA. And NOAA has started a pilot program, I think back in 2016, it's still ongoing, where they're going to the commercial sector and they're saying, hey, if you provide these different data sets, we'll pay you for them. And it's been going pretty well. And just about each year, they keep re-upping and saying, okay, can we get a little more? And you now have commercial companies that are offering different types of weather data sets. And now who would be the beneficiaries of them? I mean, it could be hedge fund managers and people that have insurance products, people in the agricultural industry. And these are new, and this is generating weather data in new types of way without getting too deep in the weeds. They're using this technology called geo-occultation. And they're basically taking these satellites that were taking timing signals, sort of like GPS, or they bounce them across the Earth, but they figured out novel ways to take the signals as they bounce them into the atmosphere to basically get weather results from this.
So there's weather, there's data and weather as one application. I'm assuming data is probably a huge area, right? Like shipping.
That's the low-hanging fruit that's happening right now today.
Okay.
But as we go further out in terms of like 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, manufacturing in space could include pharmaceuticals, new types of materials for both in space and back on Earth. There's right now a pilot project looking at how you could develop or manufacture computer chips in Earth, because you won't necessarily need some of the same resources to in terms of water and cooling and other. You have different types of thermal issues in space, but there could be a promising area of basically developing chip fabs in space. And, that uses a lot of water and a lot of resources. And so if we could do some of that in space, that would have economic benefits. It would have societal benefits. If we're able to reduce some of our footprint here on Earth, even if it's just in initially token types of ways, and then hopefully to build to more significant, meaningful, scalable types of ways, I think that would be really, really beneficial, as we're finding that with climate change, we need to look at all options.
Is that the fastest growing aspect of the industry? Because there's other things that are popping up, like asteroid mining, and then other things beyond that. Do we think in space manufacturing is the future versus like this whole commercialization with space flights?
It's not an either or. It's going on in parallel. What you see happening right now is space, as if you think of space as just a place. It is that. It's the higher ground. That's why countries have wanted it for geopolitical advantage, saying, hey, we're on the highest mountain. We're above Mount Everest. We are literally in space, able to look down. Now we're seeing the moon because, hey, the moon is 250,000 miles away and we can see all of the Earth environment, not just a little footprint. So you have that, but space is also an enabler. It allows, whether it's for, since humans have been around, it's influenced our dreams, our nightmares, but it's also going to, the space environment is going to, because of its uniqueness, will enable new activities. So I don't see it as an either or. I think where the paradigm is shifting is that as the price to get to space gets not just cheaper, but more predictable. So it used to be, you'd sort of say, okay, it was going to cost me $10,000 per, say, kilogram to get to space, but you didn't even really know when you would be able to get to space. It might be you're an academic and, your project that was $1 million might get there in the next 4 years. What if I can say, hey, I know that I can get you to space within the next quarter? Space is becoming predictable in terms of when you can get there. There's a price. So you can start, once you get have those data points, you can start fine tuning what the rest of your project could look like. And I think that's going to fundamentally game changer. And then you have there's kind of a little bit of an unknown. It's not an unknown, but SpaceX is developing this thing called Starship, which is this really big vehicle to get to space. And some of the other experts in the field have been trying to figure out all the use cases. And they say, okay, let's take up like all of the next 10 years satellites that we think that the communications industry, let's put up a space station. And essentially it has so much capacity. And if it really becomes operational in such a short period of time, it could put so many of our things into space. People are scratching their heads going, oh my God, we've done everything we need to do. What's next?
Right.
So that's when you really have to start digging deep, going, okay, we've put all these things, these assets into space that like we're going to take us 10 years and we did it within 1 year. What next?
That's kind of the nature of science, right? And the benefit of science is that there's application IP research that we do. And then at the same time, there's just kind of academic research that we do. And some of this is in that where the applications are forthcoming. I mean, 5G is kind of in that space. We don't know exactly what we're going to do with it yet, but it's coming. And so like this trend of understanding the technology, understanding the cost better is accelerating things. And so what I've heard from you is like, there's the data applications. There's this sort of scientific research innovation applications. There's this manufacturing applications of mining and sending stuff, protecting the earth a little bit, which we'll get into in a little bit about finding new ways of manufacturing in space. But I think the one that comes foremost to mind, and I would love to get your opinion on, is kind of what we hear from Musk, that we need to inhabit Mars. Is the purpose of this that we just leave the earth and we're done with it? We've screwed it up. It's too much. And we're all going to Mars. Are we trying to have like space stations all around? Like, where is the habitation of humans happening, or what's the idea around that?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. So, Elon Musk has one of his unique and rare traits. Well, first of all, let's mention that he went to university. He did his undergrad at University of Pennsylvania. So he studied economics and physics there. And Elon is able to raise almost infinite amounts of money for science fiction. And I think there's been plenty of other wealthy people before, but they didn't really have the vision to kind of just do really cool, edgy projects. He's not interested in a yacht. He's not interested in just buying trophy houses. I mean, yeah, he probably has an ego. We're all humans and have an ego and want some type of legacy and do a cool thing. But he really is interested in doing uniquely challenging things. And he could have failed a lot of different ways with investing in a car company and building a rocket company. Space has the unique challenges. It has regulatory risk, it has technology risk, and market risk. That's why for a long time nobody would invest in it. They're like, I'm not. An investor usually wants 1 out of 3, maybe 3 out of 3. They're like, okay, that's just a money pit. And so Elon did that. I don't think he's concerned about the environment and how we've been, quote, messing it up and not being good stewards of it. But the fact is there are thousands of objects that one day, one of them will hit the earth. One day. It might happen next week. It could be in 100,000 years. but there will be an object, and it doesn't have to be that large. These things can be like, football field, even smaller, and cause catastrophic damage. I mean, is it not worth having insurance policy so that like an entire region or that millions of people on the planet don't get killed? And so Elon is just saying, look, let's just make us a multi-planetary species to sort of as an insurance policy. And it's not just because of the environmental issue. It's partially because humans are silly and aren't very, we're not very mature, but he's also, I think, concerned, about things like, asteroids, object, a near Earth object. One day, one of them will hit the planet Earth. I mean, I think it was back 10 years ago, maybe sometime in the past 15 years, there was this object that hit northern Russia, and it sent hundreds of people to the hospital. Thankfully, there were no fatalities. There was a lot of damage and injuries, and that was just an airburst. It didn't even directly hit anything. It was essentially, it broke up over the atmosphere, and I think it was the shock wave.
Is that the vision that you have? So, I mean, that's Elon's vision, and he's Iron Man, and he does his own crazy things. But is that your vision from your book and from other things? It seems almost like you think of space as like a job area, like a manufacturing area, and Earth is where we live. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think right now in the 2020 to 2030, of the next 10 years, our job is to share with people that Earth is part of the solar system, and to start understanding that humanity is just get into this mindset that we are living here in the solar system, and that we can use it just as we use, hopefully in a smarter way, use the resources of the solar system for humanity. That people should be able to start to transition to doing jobs in the space economy. And I think over the next 10 years, I think the jobs and the things are going to be reflective more of this lower Earth orbit economy, and maybe in the moon. The moon there'll be some development of the moon, but essentially there'll be more probably robots on the moon and a few humans establishing some type of presence on Earth. And then I think as we move further out, and as everything just becomes easier, less expensive, and somebody finally starts to develop an artificial gravity space station, my personal belief is that we'll maybe have more traction building larger space stations in free space, so that it would be easier for humans to just do things as they would on Earth without worrying about all the effects of microgravity on their bones and muscles. Granted, there's still radiation issues. I think Mars will happen, but it's just not totally convinced that that's our first path. I think it's more about getting people into space between here and the Earth. I mean, here and the moon, here and the moon.
So artificial gravity space station, I think we have to dive into that a little bit deeper. What does that mean? Is that like in the movies, Xenon, 21st century, we're all just living in this suborbital area, living our daily lives? Is that what that means?
In the long term, yes. There's a book by Jerry O'Neill called The High Frontier, and it has some great illustrations what that looks like. The idea in The High Frontier is that you would build this, it almost looks like a big tube. It spins, so you can change the gravity. You would probably want it similar or the same as Earth, and you would build literally Earth-like environments on it. And you could use through mirrors. You could generate electricity. You could generate sunlight. You could make a very comfortable shirt sleeve environment, and perhaps even have things like parks and lakes and maybe other types of Earth-like environments. And people would go about their life on that. I think the earliest case I can remember is in the movie 2001. They've got one of these rotational space stations. Now it looks just like a space station. It doesn't have like a park. It looks more like it's like a circular airport terminal. Everything looks more like an airport terminal with furniture that doesn't really look too futuristic. But whatever. It was the late 60s. That's whatever that was at that time. But I think there are movies like Elysium that I've not seen that maybe have some more visuals. But what I would caution people is many of those science fiction films are more, they're pessimistic, and they have a dystopian view. It's kind of like Earth's been screwed up and it's only a very elite group of people that can get to leave Earth. And I don't view that. I think it should be that where all of humanity has this choice to come back and forth. It might be like you live on Earth and you work in space or vice versa, or like you have a timeshare, you get to go to space for, a month out of the year. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it should just be more, space should be normalized.
Yeah. So what do you think that we're closer to? This like gravity space station or actually going to Mars? Seems like Mars is still a distant future and everyone talks about colonizing Mars, but at the same time, it's more so just commercializing space flight and doing really expensive, fun trips where you can get a good Instagram photo.
I don't think it's, yeah, I don't think it's either yet, because nobody has built any type of artificial gravity platform, even a little one. Maybe they've got like something, a small centrifuge, maybe for like mice. I'm not sure, but I don't think we have anything. There's nothing of any significance that's been developed, and there's still so many unknowns. We've had people in space for over a year, but we've not had any humans go beyond the moon and deal with the potential radiation risk. And I know some people say, oh, it's negligible. The cancer risks are negligible, but I've heard that that's not necessarily the case, because also Mars doesn't have as strong of a protective magnetic field. So I don't think it would be fun to live in a tunnel like around most of the rest of my life, and maybe you'll peek my head out once a month. It doesn't sound that much. That doesn't sound like a really thriving way to live. So I think we still have a lot to learn. We're still just figuring out how to get people safely to and from space.
Mm-hmm.
But now that there's a lot of interest in just the general subject area, we're no longer waiting for just the research by the government agencies. There's now private organizations that are looking at everything from how do you manufacture food to space, how do you safeguard humans. I was talking to someone yesterday who is one of these human development coaches, and they're reframing their whole career where they want to coach people for long-term habitation in space and do astronaut coaching, and saying, look, how do we be in a mental framework to be in a spacecraft with, like, whether it's 10 people or 100 people, the same people for an entire year, and you can't leave. Like, how do you deal?
Well, I think these are the interesting questions, right? Like, and I think we've seen in tech that regulation has become more of an important question than it potentially used to be, right? And as you're talking about this kind of nascent stage of, we don't know where space is going, but we're kind of marching in this direction. How do we think about these issues, particularly around like environmental, like, are we going to screw up space by just going all up into space? And then, I mean, I watched West Wing recently, and that's what, a 10-year-old show. And they were talking about militarization of space. Like, do we have any regulation around that? What are your thoughts on kind of this environmental issue and, like, let's not militarize space too quickly?
Well, space militarization has been thought about for, I think since the 50s. There was a paper to actually put a U.S. Air Force base on the moon. I think the paper was written back in the late 50s or maybe early 60s. And so this has been discussed for a long time. How we use the domain of space is really critical. What's a little different in terms of now is the private sector, at least in the U.S., has had a lot of autonomy. Although there's still gaps in between things. And so, policy papers get pushed around in think tanks and make their way into Congress. Usually not much happens, but now we have like this thing called the Artemis Accords, where the U.S. is trying to get other nations to behave, to say, hey, we're going to sign and participate in a certain way on the moon. We don't know how successful yet. It's still too soon to tell. I think there's still room for self-regulation. I think there's still going to be some room for using things like consortiums so that domiciled in different countries can make contractual agreements together, because I think we're in a place where the industry is moving more fast than the policy. And that's common.
Right.
Technology moves faster than governments, and they're trying to play catch up. But there is a real definite danger of further causing more challenges in the space environment through competition, through nation states, through potential warfare, or just bad actors. Somebody allowing their spacecraft to collide with another one could cause significant long-term issues. So space is going to take, a lot of negotiation, because I think how do you serve short-term interests and long-term interests?
If you're the chancellor of space, and I nominate you as the chancellor of space today, what is the 2 or 3 most important regulations, whether military or environmental, that you would place in? I mean, you talk about space wilderness a lot, either in your book and in some previous podcasts. Like, what is important to you from that aspect?
Well, this probably wouldn't make a lot of fans initially and early on, but I would say, look, let's actually have a discussion about setting aside a healthy chunk of the solar system as wilderness, like what we do with Antarctica, maybe similar to what we do with Antarctica. And the counterpoint will be, it's like, look, there's plenty of resources for hundreds of generations to use the rest. And I think making any person or organization who's going to go to space or send something in space almost sign a declaration saying, I will be a good participant in space. And it happens. There was a popular and it's still like relatively successful satellite communications company that they sent a satellite to space without getting the proper communications authority of the spectrum. And they just started, kind of transmitting. And it was pretty rebellious. And then they kind of thumbed their nose, they paid the fine and raised a bunch of capital. I don't necessarily know if there should have been other punitive action taken against the company, but they raised a bunch of money, which in some ways was kind of like rewarding a little bit of their bad behavior. They've changed their tune and they're in alignment with the laws. Right now in a Wild West area like space, where people want to make a lot of money, there's a lot of high valuations of companies. Sometimes the enthusiasm gets ahead of rationality. And space is a difficult and potentially dangerous area that's fraught with, it's not like if you build a bad website, you're probably not going to kill somebody. But if you pollute an environment and prevent people for, potentially for 100 years from using that particular area, I mean, that's a ramification that I think is pretty serious.
Right. And where are we today, right? Like we are a business show, fortunately or unfortunately. So as much as we want to talk about regulation, what is the space marketplace? You talk about lawyers, you talk about brokers. What is this marketplace of space that we need to think of as we think about kind of the business of space?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit like data, earlier. So you have groups that are sending satellites that they're measuring some type of change in the planet, or they've got a sensor on their spacecraft. And early on, it used to just be like, okay, that's valuable, but people were going, no, you actually have to put some intelligence or analytics on it to make it useful to someone. So you have some of these companies that are now creating some of their own proprietary products to create insights, to make that suite of instrumentation from the spacecraft, to make that data useful to someone. And sometimes it's taken those companies sometimes several years to figure out who is the exact customer. Is it the fishing industry? Is it the energy industry? Is it a hedge fund manager? There is an existing and growing marketplace for data, and sometimes you'll see different size ranges, but people want, if it's information that'll give them a competitive advantage to then they're probably willing to pay for it. And how much you're willing to pay for it is sometimes to be determined. So there is a market there for that. There is a market to get experiments into lower Earth orbit, whether it's on the International Space Station or other solely dedicated satellites. There is probably a small market in terms of the space tourism, getting humans to space. Virgin Galactic has developed a capacity to gain deposits, although they are not yet flying to space. So once they can bridge that very long gap and maybe be able to prove that they can fly repeatedly and safely at some type of predictable tempo, they'll probably get rewarded by public markets even further. That says, wow, okay, instead of just having, I don't even know, I think they have like 900 deposits. I think I've heard somewhere between 500 to 1,000. I think that'll vastly increase that people say, hey, I'll put down a deposit if they can fly safely in space.
There's also like other I guess industries or players. Like, I mean, thinking about students and how they can get into space outside of being an astronaut. Like, can you talk more about this idea of like there's going to be brokers and there's going to be lawyers? I've heard you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so space has a lot of contracting, a lot of paperwork. Whether you're filing for approval and licensing through various agencies, whether you're a U.S. company or doing work outside, there's a lot of work for lawyers that tend to just kind of make sure the kind of all the check boxes essentially are hit there. There are brokers now. There are groups that, if you have let's say you have your payload and you don't really care how you just want to get it to space. There are brokers that will help you facilitate getting that to space. There's kind of all these interstitial activity in between. I mean, look, even a physical NASA center has a lot of infrastructure. It costs billions of dollars to keep the lights on. So there are companies and there are contractors, private contractors that contract with the U.S. government to take care of all sorts of services and they're not necessarily U.S. They're not working. They're contracted for the U.S. government, but they're just contractors and they're private employees.
How much money you mentioned previously? How much money do you think that generates in terms of jobs and revenues, or how much spending is going there? Can you put a dollar figure around that stuff?
I can't, but I can just. There was a study that I think it came out of a school in Illinois just last month around. It looked at NASA spending, which was like $19.5 billion, and that generated about $64 billion in total economic output, and there were billions of dollars in taxes paid, and so that's significant in terms of like what NASA as an agency. But then you have you've got the DoD, which is a little bit more opaque. You can even have you can look to other national agencies. India has a very fast growing big one. Japan, of course, China. Canada has recently announced that they want to create indigenous human launch. They've always done things like they're very proud of their robotic Canada arm.
Right.
The space station, the space shuttle, they're already proud. They do that very well. But they've said that they want to now go into having indigenous launch, which is interesting. So globally, it's right now I think including all the satellites, the DoD, the NASA's, the European Space Agency, all that stuff. It's right now about $365-ish billion global industry, but I think it could be much bigger in less than a decade. I think it could be $1 trillion plus industry.
Where do the private players come into play? So we know that NASA is the OG. So if you're a startup, if you're SpaceX, are they always collaborating with NASA, or are they primarily operating as themselves, or do they just have to partner since they have the space station, they have all the infrastructure in place, and they're constantly in this, whether they like it or not, relationship with NASA?
It all depends on what they want to do. So I'm working with this one startup that we're sending commercial payload to the moon. So we're partnering with a commercial provider. It's a private U.S. company that has some contract funding and grant funding from NASA, but they also have their own internal private funding. They are selling to industry to take payload to the moon. So we have made we didn't have any conversations with NASA or something. We had private negotiations with them as a commercial carrier, and we signed a commercial contract. We put down a deposit. I think it's like 3 or 4 payments over about a year. And it's like got fairly standard terms, and it has terms of what happens if it crashes. What do we pay to go on the second flight? It has it's got this type of language in it, and you're finding a lot of many companies. Like maybe the government, like NASA's there, maybe somewhere where if you're flying on, if you're flying on a European rocket, you're not really dealing with NASA. However, if your technology is being exported it might have a security regulation. There might be an export control in terms of, is it treated as a as something that could be there's as an armament, and there's all sorts of considerations there. But you might never actually have a lot of one-on-one with the government agency. If you're, you might, if you have, there's brokers taking like tchotchkes and mementos to space, and as long as it like isn't flammable and it isn't going to cause, have an off-gassing issue or something else, they say, okay, fine, we're going to put it in on the spacecraft and it'll
As we talk about the private sector, I know we're coming up close to time. I want to get your hot take on Branson, Bezos, and Musk. Who's winning and why? Or is there just some random fourth player that I've never heard of that you really think is really killing the space?
There's many smaller fourth players, and I wish I could highlight them all. I think Musk is the one who is right now. He is leading and going the fastest. I've said it several times that I wish Jeff Bezos would go faster, and the argument is that he can do things, privately, secretly. There's things that we don't really know about, but I've heard enough insider talk that he needs to be going faster because Bezos envisions having the city in space in like 10 to 20 years. Well, unless he knows something about life extension, that I don't know, he needs to be going faster.
Right.
And even, his rocket system potentially, his launch system could potentially be outperformed by Musk if he doesn't, recalibrate and move quicker. But Bezos does have, he's got Amazon stock on his side. So that's that. But, and his company is becoming very, he seems like he's becoming very dependent on wanting these military and government related contracts. I wish he would just go out there and just be even more bold and more aggressive and just do things more faster. Like just stop buying houses and stuff. Get like Elon, get more lean. Get more lean.
I love that response. I love the candor. I think we're coming up on time, so I'm really interested. I mean, space is this really futuristic topic. And so we have this kind of constant closing question that we ask folks. And I'm really interested to hear your perspective. That what is kind of your boldest, most interesting, unique prediction of where the world's going to be 5 to 8 years from now with regards to space? Like, what do you believe in your heart, even though it's probably a total moonshot?
I think we'll see, I think potentially see some therapeutics in some ways to help people, maybe thinking of like life sciences and medical type of breakthroughs. That might be a big surprise, like serendipity from space. Because as space will get less expensive, people will be more willing to fund some experiments in a really robust way. And maybe we'll see a discovery. And this could come from other areas too, maybe in the, maybe materials and manufacturing, but something new and so novel and so useful and valuable on Earth. And people are like going to be like, why did we do this 20 to 30 years ago? We could have been doing this. We weren't bold enough.
What is it about space that allows pharma to be able to do that? I mean, materials, I understand, like thermodynamics and new interesting things about thermodynamics. How does that work in the pharma space?
Well, apparently, there's some mystery in terms of like things like viruses apparently reactivate in microgravity. They're not sure why. They've had some astronauts that had like some of the more harmless or less harmful forms of herpes. When you get like a fever sore, like a sore on your lip or something like that. And sometimes they're reactivating in space. They don't know why. They know that some bacteria, the ones that are more drug resistant, have some interesting properties in microgravity. They don't know why. We should be studying this because we know that we're hitting some limits with our use with antibiotics on Earth. Apparently, the area around crystals and protein crystals apparently is mostly pretty studied, and they haven't really gotten the breakthrough that they wanted. But in zero gravity, things just behave differently. There's a whole study around how how things like smoke and flames could behave in space.
Hmm.
I'm not quite sure how that would be applicable on Earth, but I can imagine we definitely need to understand why combustion, to safeguard our equipment and people in space. So really understanding, potential future firefighting. But I think the microgravity environment just has these unique properties that we need to be just putting different, widget, whatever it is there, seeing how it behaves differently and doing it many times so we can really understand it. And if it ends up having a unique characteristic, maybe there's a way we can take advantage of that to our benefit.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I know the whole globe wishes that there would be some COVID innovation that comes from space that helps us get out of this quarantine. But Robert, thank you so much for spending time with us. This was a fascinating and enlightening conversation. Thank you for meeting with our students earlier in the live discussions and answering all of our questions there. We appreciate your time. And I wanted to definitely put a shout out, or allow you to actually put a shout out for your book, please.
Yeah, I'd love for people to check out my book. It's called Space is Open for Business at that URL, spaceisopenforbusiness.com, and I have all sorts of fun other free material for people who want to kind of like check out before they want to purchase. And it's a fun read for those who really want to get maybe immersed in saying, gosh, imagine if I were pre-internet and I wanted to imagine what was going on. Could I have envisioned Uber, Tinder, Facebook, and all these other things that came out of the internet? I'm suggesting that space could be a little bit like this.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate your time.